I had a soldier who was brave in all the ways the world applauds, except one. Every single time he stepped up in front of others to speak, even his peers, his body would betray him. Just him, though? Hey there, guys. Welcome back. Warren here. If you're new here, welcome. If you're coming back, welcome back to the place where we try to reflect on being humans and laugh and step off into the absurdity anyway. But yeah, I had this soldier who was one of my best gunners. The guy would lasso the moon and paint the sky if you asked him to. But the minute you told him that he had to speak in front of others, especially his peers, the guys and gals who he hung out with and got excited with in the war room when we're going on missions and, hyping it up. Like I said, one of my best gunners. He wasn't an introvert by any stretch of the imagination, but he just froze every single time he had to speak in front of people. And at first, I didn't understand it. I would just challenge it like, hey, step up. What's going on? And 7 in 12% of adult Americans, according to the research, will at some point in their careers experience what is actually a medical thing. Thing is, it wasn't that he was shy. Like I said, he got along with all the guys and gals in the platoon. It was just that he had what we now know as social anxiety disorder. The cracking of the voice, the sweating profusely, the shaking of the voice, the shaking of the body, the sweating of the palms. Like I asked in the intro, just him? And I know it's not just him because I suffer from a slight version of it. I wouldn't call mine medical, but even doing this, if only you guys knew. But yeah, it's like I said, 7 to 12% of all adults at some point in their lives will go through it. But I bring it up because of how we got. And I said we because it wasn't just me. It was me and him and a few other of the leaders in the platoon. And I'm sure some of his peers behind the curtains helped too, but I'm going to get to what we did to help him get over that. And also the reason why I brought it up was because I feared for him, because in the military, at least on the NCO side, the non-commissioned officer side, the enlisted side, there used to be a process where you had to go in front of what we call the promotion board, and these are not your peers. These are seniors, usually sergeant majors of each battalion, if they can find the time. If not, it's at least first sergeants or those sitting in the first sergeant seat temporarily. So, and it's just you and your immediate supervisor sitting, like off camera behind you somewhere, usually to your left, right? But I feared for him because to advance, he had to go through that. And like I said, he exhibited all of what I just explained. I'm sure if I could have stood close to him at some point, I would have heard his heartbeat too, because you could just see it. Just and I'm laughing because the end story is pretty good. But no, at the time it was something to see. But no, it's not shyness. It's not something to be embarrassed about. It's a medical disorder, right? Social anxiety disorder. And like I said, I suffer from it too. But I feared for him because again, he was one of our best. So clearly he was on the right track for advancement along with his behavior and performance in other areas and all that good jazz. But I feared for him. So it leads me to Well, I'll give you a little backstory of how we found out about it. Because what I used to do on some of our downtime is I used to have the soldiers give each other classes, about a 30-minute block, right? We'd find a shaded area and pop up a half a screen net, or not at all if it was shaded enough. Get some lickies and chewies, and they'd give classes to each other. And it would start with, you know, task conditions standards. That was the minimum, right? Task conditions standards. And then you just have to pitch the class, right? Based on those three things to your peers. And I remember the first time I gave him a class and he was just looking down at his notes. Just like, what's going on? And he's like, Sergeant Pete, this is actually one of my better classes. I know this. And I'm like, well, there you go. Knock it out of the park. No, he was like, I can't teach it. And I'm like, task condition standards. Long story short, he explained it to me, and I was just like, no, you're giving the class. Because again, I was young too, so I didn't quite understand medically, biologically what was going on, neurologically what was going on. So, non-commissioned officer pressure, it's like, no, you're going to do it. Find a way, get help, whatever, but you're doing it. And the poor kid, the day he pitched that class, was brutal. It was brutal. And at first I thought there was some acting involved, and it wasn't. It was just brutal. How do we help this kid, right? Because some of those, resources at the time, CBT training and all that good jazz, wasn't around. Or we were doing it without knowing we were doing it. Because after running the episode through my head, I thought we were doing it without titles. But CBT, at least to me, by definition, and as a resource provided by the military, I don't think existed. I'll check, but I don't think it exists now either. Anyway, I was just like, what are we going to do to help this kid? Right. And I say we were doing CBT without knowing it, because one of the things they train is repetition. And that's exactly what we did. We overwhelmed the kid with teaching classes. And in addition to that, I used the second part of what I really want to talk about. We used the mirror. And I want to transition to that by asking a question. How often do we use our mirrors for superficiality and for judgment? Maybe you didn't hear me, so I'll ask again. How often do we use our mirrors for superficiality and or judgment? Guilty as charged, but we never turn that mirror around and use it as a resource for our growth. And I'm not saying I had some profound discovery, but I was just like, what am I going to use? Can't be with him 24/7. So thinking outside the box, I was like, give yourself the classes in front of the mirror, kid. And same thing for his practice for the board. Ask the questions and answer them in the mirror, looking at yourself in the mirror. And every time that you get one wrong, move on. Don't look in the mirror to say, see, not ready. It's only this time in preparation, and preparation for your personal growth, not the superficiality or the judgment. Again, long story short, it worked. Yeah. And the whole exercise taught me something about leadership, and that leadership doesn't or shouldn't demand confidence, but it should create a safe environment, or as safe an environment as possible for confidence to grow, right? So the mirror was intended to face confrontation, but without the humiliation, right? Without the judgment, without the constant ha ha, Look at you, you got it wrong again, right? Because we know that happens, or at least I know that happens because his peers could be brutal. They just were good kids, but they could be brutal. And I say brutal because we taught that, right? There is a nuance involved or nuances involved, but there is a there's a bit of pressure to perform instilled in soldiers, or at least my soldiers, right? And you have to know where that balance is. So with that pressure to perform, whenever one of their peers is getting something wrong, there is encouragement, but there is encouragement with a little bit of peer pressure on the humiliation side, some name calling. Anyway, the mirror takes all that away. The mirror takes all that away. And I like I said, it's not some genius idea. It was just thinking outside the box because I wanted to create a safe environment for his confidence to come out. Because, like I said, the kid shined at every single thing else. He did, except his body would betray him every single time he'd stand in front of people. Something else the mirror did was it turned they're watching me into I'm watching me and I'm safe, right? And I think in part that's kind of how fear loses its grip a little bit, you know? If you can tell yourself and be honest with yourself and say I'm safe within this space or within this thing that I'm doing, then the fear kind of softens a little bit. I mean, it doesn't disappear because it shouldn't disappear, right? We should be able to live and confront and move through and past fear, but we need it. It's what keeps us from being eaten or kept us from being eaten by wild animals before we evolved. So we need it still because there are nefarious people around. Another insight that I got from the whole episode, and I learned so much in my 20 years from my soldiers, just observing them, talking to them, seeing them perform. Another thing I learned is that you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be an expert because they're the soldiers that won't tell you anything either unless you ask. And I always say you don't have to be an expert. You just have to crack the door open just a little bit. Because if you and you go outside of the uniform on this one, I think, because if you believe that no one was intended to be mediocre, especially when you see their true potential or you can see their true potential, no one was meant to be mediocre. And when they just need a little cracking of the door, I think it's a beautiful thing to watch, which brings me to the good news and let you go. But I was just throwing it around in my head. He didn't retire from the military, but I think he did an 8-year stint, and then he got out, went back to Texas, and opened his own. Oh, by the way, he did get promoted too. He did make it through the board and did well. Did an 8-year stint, moved back to Texas, opened a small business, and last I checked, was doing really well. And it's his small business, so he has to do a lot of speaking in public. But thing I want to leave you with is you don't have to be an expert when you see somebody struggling. Sometimes it's just ask a question, ask a meaningful question. Because like I said, I had to grow too, because I probably could have seen it earlier in him if I was paying attention, but you have to be present to do that sometimes. But you don't have to be an expert, but you know your people, right? You know your team, and if you know your team well, and you can just read the tea leaves a little bit, just ask a question, and once they're willing to open up to you, then you just crack the door just a little bit, right? And just watch them blossom. So I say, just crack the door. Crack the door. Be good out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk again soon. We'll see you.